She thought she needed strength that spoke loud and clear, but what arrived came quiet, unsure, and maybe just what her heart truly needed. The wind carried dust across the prairie, the kind that stuck to your skin and didn't care how clean you tried to be. Miriam Weston stood on the edge of the station platform, her arms folded, her eyes narrowed toward the long stretch of dirt road where the stagecoach would appear. Behind her, her younger brother Jamie kicked at the loose gravel and grumbled about how boring waiting was. Miriam ignored him. Her heart beat steady but sharp. This was the day. The day her life might change. She had sent that letter 3 months ago, more out of desperation than romance. After losing her father and her mother in the same bitter winter, she had held this little farm together with grit, prayer, and not much else. Jamie was just 10, full of mischief and growing pains. She couldn't raise him and run a homestead without help. And she couldn't keep turning away every unmarried man who passed through the valley asking for her hand without offering something in return. So she wrote a letter. To a stranger. A mail-order groom. She asked for someone strong. Hard-working. A man of faith. Someone who could protect them through the winters and bring calm to her stormy life. The letters she received in return were few, but one stood out. His name was Owen Whitmore. A ranch hand from Kansas. No family. No attachments. He had written with a slow, thoughtful hand and every word felt gentle. He'd said he wasn't much to look at. That he worked hard and didn't speak much. But Miriam had imagined a quiet strength. A man of few words and firm hands. Maybe even a little rugged charm. The stagecoach wheels creaked into view just then and Jamie perked up. Miriam stood straighter. She smoothed her worn blue skirt and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The door opened and a tall man stepped down slowly. His shoulders were broad, his clothes plain. His brown hair was neatly combed, and he clutched his hat tightly in both hands. He turned and looked straight at her and smiled. Miriam's breath caught. Then he opened his mouth. Hello, I'm Miss W. Weston. I'm Owen. His voice stumbled, cracked, and halted like a wagon stuck in deep mud. His smile remained, but his eyes held a nervous flicker. Jamie snorted behind her, and somewhere near the station door, someone laughed outright. Miriam's cheeks burned. This wasn't the man she had imagined. Not strong. Not confident. Not the kind who would hush a room with his voice or face down trouble with boldness. He looked awkward. Fragile even. And the way people were already whispering made something heavy settle in her chest. She stepped forward, managing a tight smile. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I think there's been a mistake. Owen blinked. I came all this WWWA, he said, voice trembling. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought you'd be different. Owen's smile faded. He nodded slowly once like a man who had seen this kind of look before. I understand, he said softly. And most do. And with that, he turned back toward the coach, still holding his hat like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Miriam didn't watch him go. She only stared at the road, wondering what she had just done. He came to build a life, but found no welcome waiting. Still he stayed, not for himself but for the ones who had shut the door. The snow had not yet come, but the wind already carried its breath. Miriam stood at the edge of her porch with her arms wrapped around herself, not just for warmth, but to hold in all the things she didn't want to admit. Owen had left the station without complaint. Not a question. Not a fuss. Just a quiet nod and those halting words that now echoed louder than she wanted. She told him it wouldn't work. And maybe it wouldn't. But why did it feel like she just sent away the only man who hadn't tried to impress her with empty charm or loud promises? She shook the thought off. Jamie came around the side of the house, swinging a stick like a sword. That man talked funny, he said. Did you see how red his face got? Miriam's jaw tightened. He came here to marry me, Jamie. You show respect. Jamie lowered the stick but didn't apologize. Are we gonna get someone else then? Someone better? I don't know, she answered honestly. That night, as she washed the supper dishes by lamplight, a knock sounded at the door. She dried her hands on her apron and opened it slowly. There on her porch stood Owen. His hair was dusted with wind. His cheeks were red with cold. But he held something in his hands, a sack of nails, a coil of wire, and a hammer tucked under his arm. He began then paused. I saw your fence. It's falling near the CC cattle pen. Miriam blinked. You came back to fix my fence? He nodded, not looking at her, but at the broken rail she hadn't even noticed from the kitchen. I'm not staying, he said quickly. Just, figured you'd want the help. She stared at him for a moment. You don't have to. I can no. She stepped aside. The hammer's yours then. Owen walked past her with quiet steps and went straight to work. She watched from the window. No complaints. No questions. Just steady hands and quiet strength. The way he lined up the boards with care. The way he wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve like he'd done work like this all his life. Jamie came up behind her. Why's he helping if you said no? Miriam didn't answer. Because she didn't know. Not yet. But something in her heart whispered that maybe the man she'd dismissed wasn't so weak after all. Sometimes it's not the storm outside that hurts the most, it's the whispers behind your back. The next morning, Miriam rode into town with Jamie bundled in the wagon beside her, the chill nipping at their noses. She needed supplies, flour, salt, oil, and part of her needed to know if Owen had really meant to leave. Surely he had. He'd fixed the fence, left the tools neatly stacked by the barn wall, and disappeared before dawn. The general store was busy as usual. The bell above the door rang and folks turned to glance, offering nods and forced smiles. Miriam walked the aisles with her list in hand, but whispers trailed behind her like cold fingers. Did you see that mail-order fellow stammering like a fool? Heard he came all the way just to get turned out. Poor thing. Not much use if you can't speak straight. Miriam kept her eyes on the flour sack. She tried to ignore it. Jamie, meanwhile, was wandering between the shelves. Hey, he whispered suddenly, tugging on her sleeve, it's him. She looked up. And there he was, Owen, kneeling outside the store near the trough, helping a small girl retrieve a dropped doll from the mud. His fingers were gentle, his brow furrowed with care. The girl's mother stood nearby, uncomfortable, as if unsure whether to thank him or pull her daughter away. When he stood, the townsfolk around him barely hid their smirks. A lanky man near the saloon called out, loud enough for all to hear. Careful now, Owen. Don't trip over your own tongue. Laughter. Ugly, sharp. Owen just nodded, gave a soft morning, and walked away, shoulders tight. Miriam's stomach twisted. She hated that she hadn't spoken up. Hated more that Jamie laughed along under his breath. Back in the wagon, she finally turned to her brother. That wasn't funny. Jamie frowned. But everyone laughed. That doesn't make it right. He's weird. He talks slow. She looked at Jamie hard. He helped fix our fence. He walked to town with no ride. And he was kind to that little girl. Jamie folded his arms. He's still not strong. Do you think strong means loud? She asked. Jamie didn't answer. But he stopped grinning. As they rode out of town, Miriam saw Owen's figure heading toward the edge of the woods, alone. She wanted to call out. But she didn't. Not yet. She sent him away with silence, but he answered with kindness. The wind howled through the trees that night, rattling the windows like a warning. Miriam fed the stove a few more sticks of wood and wrapped Jamie in an extra quilt. They'd had harsh winters before, but this one felt colder already. By morning, snow had dusted the porch and fields. Not thick enough to trap them, but enough to bite if you weren't prepared. Miriam rose early to check the animals. Jamie was still sleeping soundly, curled under patchwork layers. When she stepped outside, she nearly dropped the bucket in her hand. The woodpile, once dwindled to scraps, was now stacked neatly and full. Split logs stood in perfect rows, dry and clean, under the lean-to beside the house. She blinked, bent down, touched the bark. Still warm. Someone had chopped it not long ago. She knew who it was. One. He hadn't asked. He hadn't spoken. He just come. In the night. Like some quiet answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to pray. She turned slowly, scanning the field and the tree line beyond. There was no sign of him. Just rabbit tracks and wind-carved drifts. Inside the barn, she found more signs of his silent kindness. The chicken coop had been mended. The latch on the feed bin replaced. A stubborn hinge on the stall door now swung smooth as butter. And still, no note. No knock. No demand. Just work done. Just things made right. Later, as Jamie helped her gather eggs, he said, "Do you think that stutter man came again?" Miriam nodded, her voice soft. "I do." "Why'd he do all that if you told him to go?" She looked at her brother's freckled face. "Because good men don't do kind things to be seen. They do them because it's who they are." Jamie frowned in thought but said nothing more. That evening, as the fire crackled in the stove and shadows stretched long across the floor, Miriam sat in her rocker and looked toward the hills. She didn't know where Owen had gone. But something in her heart ached to see him again. Not out of guilt. Not out of pity. But because the more she saw of what he did, the more she wanted to know what he would say if only given time. Snow was coming fast, and so was the moment that would test what each of them truly believed. The sky turned heavy that morning, gray and bruised like a ripening storm. Miriam stood on the porch, coat wrapped tight, staring at the horizon. The cold wind cut through her sleeves, but it wasn't the weather that chilled her. It was the silence. Owen hadn't returned. Not that she'd expected him to, but her eyes had searched for him every morning since the woodpile surprise. She didn't say his name aloud, not even to Jamie. But in her heart, she whispered it in prayer. Wherever he is, Lord, keep him warm. Keep him safe. Inside, Jamie clattered around, full of boyish energy. He hated being cooped up. Hated quiet. And he hated seeing Miriam so serious. I can go feed the goats, he said, already halfway into his boots. Not today, she said. That storm's getting close. You always say that, he mumbled. I'm not a baby. She turned sharply. No. But you're still my responsibility. And I said no. Jamie's mouth twisted, but he said nothing more. He sat by the stove, arms crossed, shoulders tight. She could feel the words he didn't say. You're not my mama. You just act like you are. Miriam tried to push past it. There was too much to do. She made bread, checked the windows, brought in more wood. The whole time that sky darkened. Snow hadn't started yet, but the stillness before it felt like a held breath. By late afternoon she noticed the quiet. Too quiet. Jamie? She called. No answer. Her heart dropped. She ran outside. His footprints were clear in the soft layer of snow, heading toward the trees. No, Jamie, not now, she whispered, grabbing her shawl and lantern. She followed the prints as far as she could, but wind had already begun to rise. The edges of the trail blurred. She called his name again and again. Still no answer. By nightfall, the snow had begun to fall in earnest, thick, fast, and blinding. Back at the house, she lit every lantern she had. Her hands trembled. Her prayers were near frantic. Lord, please. I can't lose him too. Then, a knock. Miriam spun toward the door, hope and dread clashing in her chest. She opened it. Owen stood there, covered in snow, breath fogging in front of him. A lantern in one hand, a rope coiled around his shoulder. His coat was thin. His eyes worried. Before she could speak, he said, He's gone into the woods. I'll find him. She opened her mouth, tried to stop him. But he was already gone, disappearing into the storm without waiting for her permission. He'd been turned away, ignored, and mocked. But when it mattered most, he was the only one who walked into the storm. The wind howled like a living thing. Snow swirled in thick, blinding waves, and the trees groaned under the weight of it. Every few steps, Owen had to stop and catch his breath, not from weakness but from how the storm stole it away. He held the lantern high, its light barely reaching more than a few feet ahead. His boots crunched through the snowdrifts. His coat, too thin for such weather, clung to his frame, already heavy with wet. But Owen didn't slow down. Not once. The boy is out here. That's all that matters. He called Jamie's name, again and again. Not loud because his voice couldn't carry that way. Not clear because his tongue twisted on every syllable. But he spoke it anyway. Jude Jamie? The wind stole the rest. Back at the house, Miriam stood at the window, heart pounding. She'd never felt so helpless. She clutched Jamie's scarf in her hands, pressed it to her face and whispered, Please God. Please let them both come back. She had sent Owen away. She had stood in silence while others laughed. And yet, he was the only one who had gone after her brother. Not the sheriff. Not the neighbors. Not even her. One. The man with the voice no one wanted to hear. Out in the woods, Owen pressed deeper. He paused when he saw a shape, small and still, curled beside a fallen log. He hurried forward and dropped to his knees. Jamie. Half asleep. Shivering. Snow on his hair. Lips blue. Jude Jamie? Owen said again, kneeling close, brushing snow off his coat. We'll wake up. It's me. The boy stirred. Mr. Owen? Why yes. I've got you. With trembling hands, Owen wrapped his rope around them both, pulled the boy to his chest and stood. The storm raged on, but Owen turned, one step at a time, and walked back toward the light he could barely see anymore. He didn't pray with words. Just breathed out short, silent pleas in rhythm with every step. Lord, guide me. Step. Lord, guide me. Step. And far off, through the trees, through the darkness, through the swirling snow, he saw a flicker. A lantern. Miriam's lantern. She had come out on the porch again. Held it up, though the snow slapped at her cheeks. She would hold it all night if she had to. And just when her arms were ready to fall, She saw them. Two figures in the storm. One tall. One small. One carrying the other. Owen staggered to the porch and fell to his knees, still holding Jamie tight. Miriam screamed and ran to them. I found him, Owen whispered, his voice shaking, but full of something strong and sure. Tears streamed down Miriam's face. She touched Jamie's frozen hands. Then Owen's. And for the first time, she saw him. Truly saw him. Not the stutter. Not the quiet. But the strength. Some men prove their worth with words. Others? With the way they carry what matters most through the storm. The cabin was warm now, warmer than it had felt in weeks. Miriam had stoked the fire high. Jamie lay wrapped in quilts, tucked so close to the stove that his cheeks began to pink again. His hands trembled, but he was safe. Alive. And Owen? Owen sat just a few feet away, still soaked to the skin, steam rising from his shoulders as he leaned in toward the fire. He hadn't spoken much, not that she expected him to. His breaths were slow and ragged, and his eyes stayed on Jamie like a man unwilling to blink in case it was all a dream. Miriam brought him a towel and a clean blanket. You need to change, she whispered. He nodded once and moved to the far corner, modest and quiet as if afraid to take up space. When he returned, wrapped in dry clothes, he didn't sit again. He stood by the window watching the snow fall heavier than before. His hands were still trembling. Miriam walked over. Sit, she said softly. Please. He obeyed hesitantly. She crouched beside him now, looking at him fully. Up close she could see how raw his hands were. How red his ears. How much effort it took to even sit upright. You carried him, the whole way? Owen nodded. W wasn't far. Not FF for someone who needed me. The words came out rough but steady. Her eyes filled again. Not from fear but something deeper. Something like shame laced with wonder. I was wrong about you, she said. He looked at her, unsure. I thought a strong man needed a loud voice. Fast words. Confidence that filled a room. She reached out slowly, gently took his hand in hers. But maybe strength looks more like this. Owen swallowed hard. His lips parted, but no words came. Miriam smiled through her tears. You don't have to say anything tonight. And in that quiet moment, as snow softened the world outside, and the fire cracked gently between them, she saw peace in his eyes. Not triumph. Not pride. Just the quiet peace of a man who did what was right, even when no one was watching. And somewhere deep in her chest, a new feeling began to grow. Respect. Gratitude. And maybe something more. His voice had always come slow, but when it finally came, it carried more truth than all the loud men combined. Morning came gentle and pale. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a thick white blanket across the hills. Sunlight caught in the icicles lining the porch, casting rainbows on the cabin walls. Inside, Jamie stirred and opened his eyes. Is Mr. Owen still here? He asked in a raspy whisper. Miriam smiled softly. He is. Owen had fallen asleep beside the fireplace, sitting up with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He looked peaceful for once. Not braced against judgment. Not shrinking from laughter. Just still. Later that morning, once Jamie was fed and tucked into his bed with a warm stone under the covers, Miriam poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Owen. He took it carefully, his fingers brushing hers. They sat for a long time without speaking. It wasn't uncomfortable. Just quiet. Honest. Finally, Miriam broke the silence. You didn't have to come for him. Owen looked down at his hands. I did. Why? He hesitated. Then slowly, like a man planting each word like a seed in dry soil, he began to speak. BB because when IWW was a boy, IG got left B behind. In the snow. What? I didn't want that FF for him. Miriam's breath caught. She hadn't known. He went on, his voice trembling but strong. And most folks, they don't wait long enough for me to get a word out. So I stopped trying. Easier to be quiet. She swallowed hard. He looked at her then. Straight on. But why you looked at me? Like I could say something that mattered. A tear slipped down her cheek. I've wanted to speak, Owen whispered. But I never thought my VV voice would be wanted. She reached over and placed her hand gently over his. I want to hear every word, she said. Even the ones that take a little longer. He blinked quickly like he didn't believe her. But she meant it. And something in the room shifted, not in noise but in weight. Like a heavy silence had lifted, and in its place was a quiet strength neither of them had known how to name before. He looked away shyly then back again. And Miriam, thank you. She smiled. And for the first time she didn't hear the stutter. She heard the man. Some blessings don't arrive the way we expected, but that doesn't make them any less sent by God. Spring came slow that year, melting winter one soft ray at a time. The snow gave way to green shoots. The creek behind the cabin began to babble again. Jamie's laughter returned to the yard, stronger than ever. And Miriam? Her heart began to thaw too. Owen didn't leave. He didn't speak much, but every word he did say was planted deep, watered by truth. He repaired the barn roof. He taught Jamie how to tie proper knots and how to listen to the wind. He walked to town every Sunday to sit with Miriam and Jamie at the back pew, quiet, respectful, unnoticed by many but deeply seen by a few. The whispers didn't go away. Some folks still stared. Some still joked. But now Miriam didn't look away in shame. She looked back in quiet defiance. Because she knew who Owen truly was. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the porch, Miriam stood beside him, hands tucked into her apron. "You came here to marry me?" she said softly. Owen nodded, eyes downcast. "Why yes, but I understand why you said no." She stepped closer. "I didn't understand what I was saying no to," she whispered. He turned to her, uncertain. She smiled now, gently, truly. "I thought I wanted a man who could impress everyone. Who could speak smooth and ride fast and silence a room. But God didn't send me that." She reached for his hand and held it in both of hers. "He sent me you?" Owen blinked. Why you want me to stay? As your husband? "I want the man who carried my brother through a blizzard," she said, voice trembling. "The man who speaks few words but lives 100 truths. I want you, Owen." His eyes glistened. And though it took him a long moment, when he finally whispered, "Why, it was the clearest answer she'd ever heard. Jamie burst out the cabin door just then, holding a stick like a sword, and shouted, "Are we gonna be a real family now?" Miriam laughed through her tears. "Yes, Jamie. We are." The boy who once laughed at Owen's voice now ran to hug his leg tight. And for once, the world felt perfectly, wonderfully quiet. Not all vows are spoken loud. Some are lived day by day in quiet strength and faithful love. The wedding was small. Just a few neighbors, the preacher, and a modest bouquet of wildflowers tied with a ribbon. Miriam wore her mother's lace shawl. Owen wore his best shirt, one of the buttons mended by Miriam's own hands. Jamie stood proudly between them. His hair combed, his shoes polished, his grin too big to hide. Owen stuttered through his vows. Every word came slow. Every word came true. When he said, "I will Ella love you and Miriam all my days," there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. That evening, the three of them sat on the front porch, watching the sky bloom in oranges and pinks. Jamie leaned against Owen's side, half asleep. Miriam held Owen's hand, their fingers laced tight. No crowd watched them now. No whispers. No cruel laughter. Just peace. And as the crickets began to sing, Owen whispered the words he'd practiced 100 times in silence. Thank you. For not giving up on him and me." Miriam leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think," she said softly, "God never gave up on us either." And with that, the quietest man she'd ever met became the loudest voice in her heart. If this story touched your heart, friend, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs reminding that God's strength is often found in the quietest places, and that love doesn't always come with loud words. Leave a kind word in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for more tender, faith-filled Western stories just like this one. Because sometimes, the voice that stumbles speaks the deepest truth.